Welcome back to Talking Sense. Again, this is our third episode with Ryan Evans from Wayfinder Insurance. As we talked about in the past, if you can buy it, he can help you insure it. And we've covered already some cautionary tales from your 15 years of experience. We've covered auto insurance and how full coverage can be a myth. And if you missed those episodes, you can go find them on our YouTube channel or on the podcast, provided that you prefer, under the Talking Sense episodes. Today, we're going to talk about how you can keep things under an umbrella and protect your overall financial picture. But before we even get into that, I think there are some misunderstandings about how umbrella coverage works. And I want to hear, you went to an event, you said an industry event, and you heard about the biggest claim that this large national provider had ever paid.
Yeah, so it was actually it was an event for new and experienced agents. There's probably 40 of us in a room, and we had the opportunity to, we went into a Q&A with the head of the claims with this particular company. And again, this was a large national carrier. We're not talking about just an Arkansas-based company. And somebody asked the question, what's the largest claims payout that you have ever personally taken part of processing? And we were all waiting on like, hey, it's a large warehouse fire, a football stadium got hit by a hurricane. Like, we're looking for this like big natural disaster event, and just popped off right out of his mouth. He said, oh, it was a 12-year-old's birthday party at a pool. And all of us were just completely taken back by it. But unfortunately, in this scenario, it was a barbecue that we've all been to, you know, a bunch of kids running around, swimming in the pool. I think Dad was giving boat rides at the lake. And in this story, again, this wasn't my story, and I don't remember how many millions this event got into, but a young man had jumped off the diving board, and another young man jumped off the diving board a little bit too soon. And unfortunately, a young man passed in this event. But again, a lot of things, obviously you imagine the wrongful death scenario and the punitive damages that come off of that, but it was also every witness that was there, and there were so many people there. So you had multiple settlements and multiple payouts for the people that witnessed this event to their friends. I mean, that's the thing, is you're talking about family and friends that at this event. And again, I don't remember the exact details, but it was in the multi-millions.
And like you said, this is something that all of us have been to. And I think when it comes to swimming pools, most homeowners understand they have risk there. But the reality is we're all surrounded by risks when it comes to things that could go wrong, that could impact your financial journey or impact your life too. Because even despite the financial burden of this, you know, those lives were changed, all of the people that were present. So we understand that piece is something you cannot quantify. But my job as a financial advisor is to always look for gaps, things that could derail someone's financial plan. And I'll acknowledge this is one of those areas where I used to be like, okay, sure, I need an umbrella policy. Okay. But I will say I have learned, what I have found is that it's a very inexpensive way to provide substantial coverage for the things your insurance cannot fully cover. Because we talked about in our last episode with car insurance, for instance, everything has a limit. There are caps on the coverage that you can get. So if your cap is met, either you personally pay for this out of your own pocket, maybe having to dip into your 401k and things like that to cover it, or you need something else to step in and insure that. And in this case, an umbrella policy can be a very cost-effective way to provide an extra layer of protection. So let's talk about the example of injury on your property.
Yeah, so I had an experience with a client and an acquaintance that they had a scenario that had happened many years prior to this, and it was an incident that happened on somebody else's property, and there was a dispute at the time about what had happened, but many years have went by. I mean, we're talking 10, 15 years have gone by, and new things came to light, I guess you would say, and the incident was brought back to the surface. In that incident, there's multiple scenarios where lawsuits were filed, different people being accused of different things, and multiple defenses now coming out of that scenario. What is very unique about, and it's kind of funny because we talked about, I made a big point of per occurrence in a previous recording when it comes to the time of a claim on like a weather event.
And just to clarify that real quick for those that may not have caught that, the insurance provider that was the insurance provider at the time of the incident typically is the only one that will cover something related to that incident.
Correct.
So, okay, now continue.
It goes back to the event.
Mm-hmm.
In many cases, I can't say in all cases, when it comes to liability coverage, because of the fact that there's just a lot of variables and being able to track down and pinpoint. In many cases, it's on a claims made basis.
So when the person made you aware of the issue.
That's exactly right. So in one particular case, we have an individual that wasn't really even old enough to be a homeowner, but is now a first-time homeowner and a couple years into their homeowner's policy that now has a homeowner's policy that is kicking in to defend them over a certain situation. And the insurance company has actually hired a legal defense for them to defend them in a scenario that they weren't old enough to even know what an escrow account was for their homeowner's insurance.
Right. And now it could get ugly. It could take a long time. It could be very expensive. So having umbrella coverage to pick up where the homeowner's policy has to drop is going to be critical for this person. So, again, it's about limits. In this case, like you said, this person had no clue this was coming. But thankfully, they have homeowners policy and an advisor who's helping them make sure they're getting taken care of. And I could imagine if I had to go find my own lawyer for a situation like this, that would be really difficult because you've got to pay out of pocket. Whereas in this case, thankfully, she's being taken care of. Now, you talked about, this is an interesting story to me because, we talk about how people will sue over just about anything. And this is a fantastic example of this. So you had a friend driving a large truck. I don't know these names, but you said a Duramax?
Yes.
Did I get it right? Okay.
Yes.
They swipe a city commuter bus.
Correct.
The only damage is to your friend's mirror, correct? 2 years later, what happens?
So again, as you said, the story, he's in a left-hand turning lane. We've all seen these trucks, whether it's a Dodge, Chevy, Ford, but you have the larger mirrors to be able to see around to the backside of your camper. So he's in the left turning lane and he's probably a little bit too close. Maybe the bus is a little bit too close. You could flip a coin on either way. And it busts his mirror. It's probably a $200 mirror. He was not the type of person that's going to get lost on his $200 mirror. He was very happy with the idea of just telling the bus driver, like, hey, sorry, that's my bad. I'll fix my mirror. We didn't even scratch the football player graphic on the side of the bus.
Right.
But they did go ahead and file an incident report, but there was no need to file a claim. There was no damages. He wasn't going to claim his mirror. Moves on with life. He gets served papers and he's getting sued by passenger number 12 on the commuter bus for a back injury and many other things and therapy and all kinds of stuff. Again, this is one of those stories that if I didn't process the claim and have to do it myself, I'm not real sure I would believe it. But they subpoenaed so much. I learned that that's one of the tactics when these lawsuits happen, that they just hammer you and hammer you and hammer you, that it costs so much to defend in many cases. And in this case, we never dipped into the umbrella coverage, but it exposed such a vulnerability. So in this case, they settled out of court for what I consider an obscene number for what the incident was. But it did make me think, and my client in this process, what if 1 through 12 really were injured?
That's what I was going to say. It was one person. What if he genuinely had hit this bus and injured 4 or 5 people, and now we're getting into a much larger claim.
Right.
And also, again, going back to the insurance company hired him a lawyer to settle it. He didn't have to go find somebody that was willing to defend him, which can cost thousands upon thousands of dollars just as the retainer to get started. And then when they start going through all that discovery process, it's only going to go up from there. And he was able to lean into his insurance company. He could have been required to show up back in another state, hire that lawyer, be present for all of these hearings. And in today's world, let's be real, people can sue. Over the silliest thing. All they've got to do is make a claim, and you've got to at least defend yourself. So it wouldn't have been too hard for him to get to the point where his insurance is cut off. Yes.
Well, and again, I think we all think, oh, I'm a great driver. That's not going to happen. That is a friend of mine and he might even be listening to this. He is the slowest, safest driver ever. We are never going to be the first ones anywhere. And in that same incident, let's just think about it a little bit differently. Let's say the same mirror happened and just the sound of that caused the bus to jerk the wheel and hit the pole or the curb next to it, technically it would have still gone back to my client's fault, and the domino effect of people could have been really injured on that.
Yes.
And that's something that we have all either done or almost done or got really close to doing. And it really did expose a vulnerability. And that is, for the record, that client does have a really great umbrella policy, but it does expose such a vulnerability to how easy that could happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, and for me, the reason I've had one over the years, but let one lapse and then didn't switch to it. But recently, I have new drivers, and it is a huge exposure point that I would not have thought of if my insurance agent hadn't educated me. The minute I called to talk about adding my son to the policy, my insurance agent said, "Hey, you need an umbrella policy." And this was a friend of mine at the time. And so, of course, I listened, and they educated me about it, like I'm sure you do with your clients, where they said, listen, you have limits. And if they get outside of that, she said, think about the cost of a house. Like if he loses control and goes ramming into the side of a building or something, it's more than just a minor thing, and it can add up really quickly. And I went, oh, yeah, I know me. I was a fairly safe driver, but I was not as safe as I needed to be at that age. And so that is a very pertinent to me. And if anybody out there has a kid who's getting started driving and you don't have an umbrella policy, you really need to get with your insurance broker. So we've talked about property, we've talked about our vehicles, but more importantly, and this is, we're going to camp out just a little bit, is your limits may not be enough. So in this case, client had really good limits on auto insurance, and they pull out in front of someone, causing a wreck by accident, injuring the passenger of the car that they hit. The last time, this claim's still being processed, but the last time you checked on this claim, you said it had already exceeded the policy limits, and it's already in the hundreds of thousands.
Yes.
Because the person needed knee surgery, lost wages, all of these things. I think a lot of people don't realize the impact that inflation has had on the cost of care in the case of an injury or in the case of an accident. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so many things that we hear, people ask questions like, well, why is my auto insurance going up? How is all these things affecting my auto insurance premiums? And when they hear someone like me make a comment about rising costs of medical expenses, what in the world does that have anything to do with my car insurance? Mm-hmm. But it is a very big player in that. And going back to that story you just used, or that example you just used, I could imagine if you're listening to this, you're picturing somebody that was laid up in the hospital for multiple days. In that scenario you're talking about, that's in the hundreds of thousands, that could exceed this person's limit. That guy drove himself to the hospital. He actually, so
walking away from the incident, it didn't feel
absolutely
as bad.
And he still went to the hospital. He knew he hurt his knee, but again, you're talking about 2 different knee surgeries. He missed significant time during those. But we're not talking about a guy that spent multiple days in ICU and had, multiple surgeries. We're talking about somebody that had a pretty, again, I don't want to downplay a knee, injury, but to have knee surgery 2 different times to repair the knee and potentially having punitive damages long-term from being able to have minimal use. And it was a very common mistake that a lot of teenagers make. Mm-hmm. They turned left on a green light and not a green arrow. And again, these are things that we've all heard or seen, and not just teenagers, we're talking about adults too. Yes. But this is somebody that had significantly higher limits, but is still potentially being exposed to exceeding those liability limits.
Yes. And again, that's where that umbrella policy, it's kind of a catch-all. If it's related to you, it can help catch all of the liability that your other insurance coverages cannot catch. And quick question, and this isn't in our thing, but it just occurred to me. So let's say you had an umbrella policy, but you had lower limits on your auto policy. Is there like a minimum you have to have in other areas to be able to qualify for that umbrella?
Yes. And the good part about...
Because I can see that being abused otherwise.
Yes. And the good part about having and purchasing an umbrella policy, I can't say all, but the majority of the insurance companies that I know of, definitely the ones I represent, require a certain underlying limit. So you have to basically have the larger liability limits already, which again also creates really good habits.
Yes.
And one thing I will say too that we've talked about before, I think a lot of people think, or the perception is, I don't have a swimming pool, my liability exposure is minimal. I don't have teen drivers, my liability exposure is minimal. I do truly believe that if you have any form of assets that you care about, again, insurance is to protect the things that we work hard for. You know, you work hard for the equity you have in your home. You work hard for the nest egg that you've created with Teresa and a great, well thought out plan. Even if your nest egg is not as big as you think your doctor's nest egg is, your doctor doesn't need it any more than you do. It's still just as important to you. So my own perspective over the last 15 years of an umbrella policy has changed a lot, from somebody with a lot of assets needing an umbrella to protect those assets to somebody that has assets that are important to them, need to protect them.
Yeah, and I think that you mentioned, the doctor, they may have the assets to be able to defend themselves, whereas the average person like me may not. The reality is that umbrella coverage is very inexpensive. So to me, it's worth every penny to know that my financial independence is better protected having it in place. So thank you guys so much for joining us today. Thank you, Ryan, for sticking with me for 3 episodes and helping educate people. I know you have the heart of an educator. So if you don't have a good insurance broker in your life, I know Ryan and his team would love to help you at Wayfinder Insurance. We hope you guys enjoyed this content, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. Thanks for listening to Talking Sense. And if you like what you hear, make sure and subscribe to the podcast to get all the newest episodes. The Jim Wealth team is available to you 24/7 at info@getreadyforthefuture.com or by calling our offices at 866-653-PLAN. That's 866-653-7526. And while we like to have fun here, we're also financial advisors, and that means disclosures. You should personally consult a financial advisor before making any investment, and no strategy can assure success. Securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advice offered through Independent Advisor Alliance. Independent Advisor Alliance and Jim Wealth Financial Advisors are separate entities from LPL Financial.